Being attacked, boarded and robbed by pirates certainly concentrates the mind. I'd taken the watch over from my crew, Alex, at 0300, and as the dawn was breaking in the Gulf of Aden, there was a sort of light mist as we headed towards the Red Sea. We were running at about 6 knots, and it was a lovely morning. Bambola, my Angus Primrose Moody 36, and me were on what felt like the last leg of our circumnavigation. We just had to get up the Red Sea and into the Mediterranean, and that was it. Done it. Out of the mist, a few hundred meters ahead, and slightly to starboard, the shape of a couple of small boats appeared. Not particularly unusual, as fishing fleets in the area were often offshore. I altered course slightly to port to give them a clear berth, and a third boat appeared out of the mist. Some of the crew in the lead boat stood up and started waving their arms at me, and there seemed to be more of them than was normal for a fishing boat. I mean, normally fishing boats were crewed by 2 or 3 blokes, and there were, I don't know, 8 or 10 in this one. But equally, I was used to fishing boats coming alongside, and we'd exchange gifts. I'd give them a pack of cigarettes or a couple of cans of beer, and they'd give me a fresh fish. So I wasn't sort of unduly concerned. We were 30 to 40 miles off the coast of the Yemen, and it occurred to me, looking at them, that maybe they were in trouble. Maybe they'd run out of food or water and were in distress. And that concerned me slightly because, whilst we had enough for ourselves, I certainly didn't have enough to take care of 30 or 40 people, if you counted all 3 boats. Anyway, the waving became more urgent, and the boats altered course directly towards me, and I could hear them shouting, which was worrying. So I shot down below, picked up the VHF, put it on 06 and called, Ulf, wake up! Ulf, wake up! We have a problem. And I went back into the cockpit. Now my crew, Alex Bush and I, had been sailing in the company of a single-hander, or we were sailing in the company of a single-hander called Ulf Reimer, who had a self-finished boat called Josephine. Nice boat, he'd done it really well. Alex and I would keep watch during the night so that Ulf could get some sleep, and the day before, his VHF had broken down, so I'd given him my handheld so that I could call him, and I was down to just my fix, which was, absolutely fine. I'd first met Ulf in Darwin, when we were waiting to be locked into the rather nice marina there. He'd lost one blade of his folding prop. He had a little 2-bladed folding prop, and I had exactly the same model in my spares locker. A few months before in New Zealand, I'd had to change the shaft because it had problems with it, and I decided to put on a fixed propeller rather than the folding propeller which I had, because I thought a fixed propeller would give me a better performance. Sitting outside Darwin Marina, waiting for the tide to come in, Martin, who was my crew at that time, another German guy, a diver, a master diver, dived on Ulf's boat and took the spare prop off mine, which happened to be exactly the same make, and fitted it onto Ulf's, so that Ulf had a proper prop. And then we locked into Darwin, and there's the 3 of us. There's Martin and Ulf and folks down on the marina here in Darwin. Really, really nice place to visit. So Martin and Ulf were both German, so Martin was a dive instructor by trade, and Ulf a nurse who had set off single-handed from Germany in his self-completed boat about the same time as I'd left Gibraltar. We chatted, and he said he was worried about the Red Sea because he only had basic GPS, and the charts and pretty old charts, which are probably pretty inaccurate. So the only way to get up the Red Sea is to go inside between the reef and the shore, and work your way inside the reef up north. But for that, you actually do need some sort of chart plotter. And I had got a laptop loaded with CMAP 93 and a dongle, so I effectively did have a chart plotter. So I said to Ulf, yeah, sure, fine. Meet us, I hope to be in Salalah, Oman, around mid-February, so meet you there. And yeah, we'll go up there in tandem. We'll go up the Red Sea, and you can follow me around in my chart plotter. You'll know if I bump into anything, get it wrong, and you'll be able to avoid things. So a few days later, in Bambola, Martin, Monique and I left Darwin and headed for West Timor, and then Phuket in Thailand. Bambola and I crossed the equator for the second time, and because it was the first time for Monique and Martin, I dressed up in my Neptune costume, and after Martin had swum across the equator, I awarded them both certificates and then threw the traditional bucket of water all over them. We sailed into Phuket at Christmas and anchored in the bay of Ao Chalon, which is really, really pretty, but filled with hundreds of local boats and a few world cruisers. It's a nice place with great beach bars, good restaurants, and it's not that touristy. It's not that full-on tourism of other places around Phuket, so it's nice. Martin, my crew, at that point decided to fly back to Germany, and I started developing a temperature and a bit of a mega stomach ache. When the temperature got to 105 degrees, I took myself off to the international hospital, where they diagnosed a dodgy gallbladder and gallstones, and said they really needed to operate on tonight because temperature of 105 is not good, and if I didn't get operated on straight away, I'd be in big doodah. So I went, yeah, okay, fine, I'll have the operation tonight, thank you very much. But as it's Christmas Eve, I thought to myself, oh gosh, I do hope the guy's sober when he's cutting into me. Anyway, had the operation, and 10 days later I staggered out of the hotel, minus my entire gallbladder, plus minus 2 gallstones, and I checked myself into a beach hotel for about a week, 10 days maybe. I was pretty weak, and I actually doubted if I could physically climb up into Bambola from the dinghy. I actually doubted if I could get into the dinghy from the landing stage at Ao Chalon. So during the 10 days in the hotel, I met up again with Manu, who had been sailing with me in the South Pacific, who was a great chef and a good fisherman and a great crew guy, French. And Manu said that he would quite like to sail with me up as far as the Mediterranean. And I went, yeah, great, Manu, that would be super. And at the same time, a young German guy, another German diver called Alex Bush, came to me, and he'd been working in a dive school in Ao Chalon, and his girlfriend had just given him a magnificent dive watch for his 21st birthday a few days before, and she had flown back to Germany, and he had decided that he'd like to well, he wondered if he could come and crew with me and crew as far as the Mediterranean with me, then he'd be able to join his girlfriend back in Germany. And I went, yes, of course. And I was delighted, because to have 2 young men crewing for the for the passage to well, the passage up to Sri Lanka was excellent, and onwards up to the Mediterranean first rate, because I really wasn't on top form. So About a few days later, came out of the hospital, bought a load of foodstuffs, victualled up Bambola, and Martin and Alex, Manu, Monique, and I set sail for Sri Lanka, which is a passage of, I don't know, it's about 1,100 miles or 10 days, something like that. In Sri Lanka, we headed into a harbour called Galle, which is really a sort of mega circumnavigator's staging point. Anybody who's sailed around the world has ended up stopping off in Galle. It's a natural staging point, and Sri Lanka's a great country, a wonderful place to visit. Mind you, if anybody thinks the forms and stuff that they have to now fill in because of Brexit are onerous, yeah, try checking into Galle. You have to visit seven different agents, and you have to do it in a certain order, and you have to take photocopies of the latest papers they issue. And I gave up. It was just impossible. You didn't know where the next agent was, where the next office was. So for the only time on my circumnavigation, I employed an agent for, I don't know, 20 US, 30 US or something, and he went round, and in a day and a half, he got me legally checked in to Sri Lanka and into Galle Harbour. So that was absolutely fine. Manu came to me once we were checked in and said he felt the risk of pirates on the next stage, which was just across the bottom of the Arabian Sea, through the Gulf of Aden, which is actually quite dodgy, and then up the Red Sea. He just thought the risk of pirates was too great, and if I didn't mind too much, he was getting on an aeroplane in Colombo, and he was going to fly out of there. And of course I said, yeah, I mean, naturally, I said, I honestly don't think there's a big issue with pirates. I don't, it's not that dodgy. I think it'll be fine, but if you feel nervous about it, clearly you have to do what you think is right for you. So I bid Manu a fond farewell, and a few days later, Alex, Monique and I set sail across the bottom of the Red Sea, through the Maldives, and into Salalah in Oman. Salalah is really the last safe staging point. People used to go into Aden, but Aden in the Yemen has become pretty dodgy. So to go into Oman, go into Salalah has been considered pretty safe. Oman is a friendly country, and that's fine. So we arrived, I don't know, 5 or 6 days later in Salalah, and there waiting for us was Ulf in Josephine. So he said hi, and I said hi, good to see you, Ulf. We exchanged pleasantries, and as it was my birthday the next day, the four of us got a taxi, went into town and explored the town, and we had lunch in a local restaurant, which was where I discovered we had truly entered into gun country, because at the reception desk there was a sort of reception outside the eating area, and in the reception desk was a huge, great china basin bowl thing beside the desk with half a dozen assault rifles in it, and behind the reception desk was a notice which said, please don't take your guns into the dining area, leave them at reception. Great. Well, I mean, we didn't have any guns, but I was suitably impressed by that. So we took a taxi back. We took a taxi back to the harbour, and chatted to some other cruisers. There must have been about a dozen or so boats in there at the time. We set up We agreed to set up something called the Red Sea Net, where we'd all chat. We chose an SSB channel, and we agreed that we'd run a net as we were all going up the Red Sea, just so we could keep in touch with each other and, just keep a bit of an eye on each other. A lot of talk about pirates. A couple of American boats were trying to persuade the American Navy to give them a frigate escort from Salalah and up the Red Sea. Other boats were preparing false wallets with out-of-date credit cards and store cards and 20 or 30 US dollars in it, so they could give these to the pirates if they were attacked. I mean, our information was that there was one pirate attack for every 200 ships, boats, vessels that passed through the Gulf of Aden towards the Red Sea. So the odds were 1 in 200, which, frankly, I didn't think was too bad. And also, all the attacks had been on merchant ships. I mean, they wanted to attack the merchant ship, a bit like Captain Roberts, that movie. They wanted to attack the merchant ship, take over the ship, hold the crew to hostage, rob whatever was on the merchant ship, then take it into a Somalian port and hold the crew to hostage and hold the ship to ransom. So neither Ulf nor I really thought it was a very serious issue. So the morning of the 25th of February, 3 boats, Bambola, Josephine with Ulf on board, and another boat called Misty Moon departed Salalah on passage for the Red Sea, it's about 700 miles, around 5 or 6 days. And this picture of Bambola with Monique and I waving was a picture Ulf took of us as we departed Salalah and went round the first headland. It's the only picture I've actually got of Bambola sailing. So the first day, Ulf keeping company with us was absolutely no problem. We both were using wind cell steering gear. I had a hydrovane, and we had no problem adjusting and keeping in touch with each other. When night came, and it was quite dark, it was a new moon, so the nights were pretty dark. It was harder. Ulf would go off to sleep, and either Alex or I would be on watch doing 3 hours on and 3 hours off, and we tended to veer away from each other. It's just the way wind cell steering gears work. So we'd use the VHF to keep in touch. So that worked fine during the night. The next day, that was fine. We were visually keeping in touch all right, but Ulf started his motor in Josephine and motored across to us and said, listen guys, my VHF has busted. He basically had a handheld VHF where he plugged into a big antenna that went, to an antenna that went to his masthead in order to give his handheld more range, and his handheld had failed. It had just died. So I gave him my handheld, which worked off the same charger as his, so that was fine. And we carried on. The next night was okay, and the next day, and we got into the third night, and that was going fine. Alex was on watch from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. He'd had to call Ulf once, I think, to get him to formate on us, and when I took over at 0300, Ulf's nav lights were not far astern, and he was clearly on the same course as us, so that was fine. So around 0600, I was getting ready to hand over my watch to to Alex. Dawn came up and so did the mist, and out of the mist I could make out first one boat, then another boat, then they were waving their arms at me, and I thought they were in trouble, short of water and so on. So I called Ulf on 06 to say there were fishing boats around and he'd better keep watch and not bump into them, and I went back into the cockpit. I could now see that the three boats were heading straight before us, straight towards us, as I said. And they were no longer waving their arms, but they now had assault rifles which they were pointing at me, and they were firing off the odd round or the odd couple of rounds in my direction. I dialed 20 degrees to port into the hydrovane to get away from them, and ran below and picked up the VHF, keyed in channel 16 and called Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. I'm being attacked by pirates. My position is 13 degrees 31 north, 48 degrees 24 east. I'm a British sailing boat. I released the key, really not expecting to hear anything, and expecting to have to put out a more formal sort of mayday, when almost immediately an American voice came back saying, this is an American warship, repeat your position, which I did, and he came back, stand by, I'll be with you in 20 minutes. There was a further burst of gunfire a lot closer, and I stuck the paper chart over my laptop. I closed my laptop, stuck the paper chart over the top of it, and ran back into the cockpit and raised my hands in the air. The lead boat was about, 40 or 50 meters from it, and he indicated, drop the sails, drop the sails, drop the sails. So, stop boat, yeah. So I wound in the jib and went up to the mast and dropped the mainsail. Dropped the mainsail down, and then headed back into the cockpit with my hands in the air, and watched them approach. They came closer. One boat peeled off and headed towards Ulf, and the other two boats circled round and came into my stern, one on each quarter. I remember thinking, I better get some fenders out. I don't want them. Fenders. I mean, really, the things you think about when you're under pressure. Crazy, huh? Well, the two boats, pirate boats, each came up onto my stern quarter, and guys started piling out of the boats onto Bambola's deck. They were carrying AKs. One of them had an Uzi. Another one had a Glock with a piece of string through the trigger guard, so it was hung around his neck, so that he had a pistol there hanging on his neck, and he could use his hands to get up. Quite efficient way of carrying a gun, I suppose. I now had about 8 or 9 armed blokes on the stern part and heading towards one of them. One of them headed up towards the mast and covered me. Another came up to me and pointed at my wrist and went, give me. So I said, yeah, sure. And handed him over my $10 Casio waterproof watch that I wore when I was sailing. And then he said, give me. So I got my binoculars out from the pouch on the steering column and handed him my rather good pair of binoculars, and looked up to see that the boom was swinging. I hadn't tightened the main sheet, and the boom was crashing around from port to starboard like mad. And I thought, I really ought to do something about this. Somebody's going to get hurt. And I thought, actually, I think I'd be quite pleased if somebody got hurt. It's funny, I wasn't really scared. I mean, yeah, I was concerned, I was nervous, but I sort of had the feeling, well, if they were going to kill me, if they were going to kill us, they could have shot me ages ago. And maybe they're just good Muslims that are following the Quran and not into physical violence and killing people, but they are just into robbing people. Strange sort of logic. Anyway, standing beside the mast was this bloke with his AK, who had obviously been assigned to cover me, and his AK was sort of aimed straight down there at my torso, and because the boat was rolling about, the boom was crashing about, he knocked his gun accidentally against the granny bar beside the mast, and the magazine dropped out and fell on the deck at his feet. And I was quite impressed, because without 1 second taking his eyes off me or lowering his gun from me, he bent down, picked up the magazine from the deck, clicked it back into his AK, and he never took his eyes off me for 1 second. So yeah, I mean, clearly they were well trained. At this moment, a somewhat bleary-eyed, I'm amazed he'd slept through so much of all this, Alex came up the companionway steps and into the cockpit and took in the image of this armed gang of people. I said, Alex, I think we should sort out the mainsail. There's no problem here. Let's just stop the boom banging around before it does any damage. And I looked at the sort of lead guy who had the Uzi and said, we fix that? And he gave me a sort of curt nod. And I said, okay, Alex, you go and fix things up at the mast, and I'll pull the main sheet in. So I pulled in the main sheet, and Alex went up and joined the guy with the AK beside the mast, and tightened up, put a quick tie around part of the mainsail. The guy with the AK turned to Alex and pointed at his wristwatch, at his absolutely beautiful brand new diving wristwatch, which his girlfriend had given him as a birthday present only a few weeks before, and said, gimme, gimme. And Alex is a young guy, you know, strong young guy. And I saw him stiffen, and I said, Alex, just give him the gun, Alex. Give him the gun, Alex. I said, Alex, just give him the watch. Just give it to him. It isn't worth our lives. And Alex, yeah, he just sort of sighed and took the wristwatch off and handed it over to the bloke, looking pretty angry, pretty cross. In a way, up to that point, I reckon that was the most dangerous point of the encounter thus far. The whole pirate crew had tensed themselves to see if Alex was going to do anything, and because he took the wise and sensible course, the pirate crew relaxed a little bit, and two of them dived off down below into the saloon for the very first time. I was concerned because Monique was still in the aft cabin, I assumed, and I saw one of them was looking around this saloon area, which is not that big in Bambola, for goodness sake, and the other one went down the tunnel aft towards my aft cabin, where Monique was presumably still there, and I waited for the screams or the shouts or whatever. But a few moments later, he came back and he stood at the companionway and he called me down and said, come. So yeah. So I wasn't sure what had happened to Monique, but I went below, and when I got down below, he went, money, give me money, holding his AK in the other hand. And I went, yeah, sure, I get money there, I'll go and get money. Yep, big smile, grimace, whatever. So I headed down the tunnel, and got into my little aft cabin and looked at the duvet, and it was just heaped up in a little heap. and clearly Monique wasn't underneath it, which is where I sort of imagined she might be when the guy didn't see her. So in Moody 36s, there's a sort of vanity unit. There's a sort of cabinet drawer thing. There's a cabinet above and a cabinet below and a drawer. And in that drawer was where I used to keep, where I kept our passports and where I kept my stash of US dollars, $600, which I'd drawn out for buying fuel and food and stuff as we went up the Red Sea. So I opened the drawer, looked at the 600 and thought, oh, should I keep? And I thought, I'm not even going to keep half of it. He's got to check. There's no point in antagonizing them. I'll just be a coward and give him the lot. So I took the bundle of notes and went back up the tunnel and handed them to the guy who was standing there with the AK, and he took the money in his hand, and the other bloke who was in the cabin attacked him. He jumped on him from behind, and the two of them started wrestling and fighting. The second bloke dropped his AK on the cabin floor, and they were wrestling on the floor for this money. And there, at my feet, at the bottom of the companionway steps, was an AK-47, primed and loaded, I assumed. And I looked down at it and thought, should I? And then I looked up at the companionway stairs, and there at the top of the stairs was the lead pirate with his Uzi, pointing it at me, just shaking his head and going. So I went, yeah, and I stepped over the AK and walked up into the cockpit. Probably by far the most sensible thing. Yeah. Would I have grabbed it? I had thought about it. I mean, it flicked through my mind. I'm not totally unfamiliar with automatic weapons. As a teledirector, I'd worked on shows like Secret Army, Blood Money, Blake 7, Doctor Who, all of which you frequently are using automatic weapons there. And so I knew what automatic were, I'd handled them, I'd used them, I knew roughly how they worked, albeit always with blanks, never with live ammunition. Just for 1/100th of a second I thought about bravely, but I didn't, thank God. I mean, they'd have massacred us. So now, more pirates piled down below, and all my electronic gear started coming up. I mean, first the radar came up and was carefully handed to another one who handed it to the guys in the boat, and then the single sideband radio, then the VHF, and I noticed that they weren't tearing them out. They were undoing, I'd imagine they would just rip the things out, but they were undoing the screws on either side, and they were undoing the connections at the back. There weren't bits of wire hanging off the back. I mean, it was all being done very neatly. And so whilst there were one lot stripping the boat of all its electronics, there was another couple who were trying to unscrew, but they didn't have any spanners, the solar panels from the arch on the stern of Bambola, where I had my solar panel. They were trying to unscrew that and failing because you needed spanners, so they obviously didn't have that gear. So I was looking at them, and as I was looking at them, I looked off further to starboard, and there, coming over the horizon, was a big plume of smoke, and a ship was starting to appear, coming up. And I thought, it's the Yank, it's the American warship. And the pirates, seeing where I was looking, looked as well, and they'd got all of my gear anyway. They'd got everything that they wanted, and they all started heading back and climbing into their boats. The last one up from below knocked my I had a GPS fixed on one of those brackets which used to hold depth sounders back in the old days of old-fashioned depth sounders, and I'd used it to mount a one of those GPSs which displays a screen with a yellow brick road, which is what I used when I was sailing, and it had been folded back in. And he knocked that, and it came out, and he looked at it, and he started undoing it, and as he was doing it, he looked up at me, and I went, and he went, "Oh, okay," and left it, and went and dived into his boat. Now, whether it was me putting on my sort of serious face expression, or whether he just didn't want to get left behind by the others, I suspect it was probably that. So he left my GPS there, which was great, and it was the last one I had, and jumped into the boat, and the two boats cast off and started motoring away, and they were joined by the third one. I could see Ulf 50 or 60 meters away. I could see his boat, and all three pirate boats started heading off away, and I took a quick compass bearing of the direction they were going, as the warship was still at approaching. I then went down into the saloon and went aft to the aft cabin, lifted up the duvet to make quite sure that it wasn't in there, and then of course there are heads in these old-fashioned Moody 36s. There's a combined ensuite, little heads with a shower and a toilet and a basin, and the woodwork is much the same paneling. And I opened the door, and there was Monique sitting on the lid of the toilet, smoking a cigarette, and very, very angry. "Don't you ever put my life in danger like that again. You are not to do that." And I went, yeah, sure, sorry. Well, I'm glad you're all right. They've gone, they've left, and there's an American warship turning up, so it's all cool. Don't worry, darling. And I went back into the cockpit where Alex was putting out a couple of vendors so that Ulf could come alongside. Ulf said he'd not been boarded or robbed, but a bullet had hit one of his shrouds, and you could see, stainless steel wire rigging, all wires were coming out of it where a round had actually bounced off or hit one of his shrouds and frayed a few stainless lines. But apparently they hadn't boarded him. At this point, the American warship turned up, except it wasn't a warship. It was actually a merchant ship, covered in camouflage paint and flying the stars and stripes, and it was carrying vehicles and containers and stuff like that. It was actually a merchant ship. It must have been a fleet auxiliary, I guess, from the American Navy, presumably taking weapons and armaments for the second Iraqi war, which was just we and the Americans were building up to it at that moment. So the American warship came up on the handheld, and he asked if we were all right, if we needed medical aid, and I said, no, we're absolutely fine, sir, but those pirates have headed off. They've headed off in that direction on a bearing of that, and they've got all our gear, and if you could get them, we'd be really, really grateful. And he said, you're sure you're fine? I went, yes, please, we're fine. If you can get back our gear, that would be terrific. So he went, roger that, and steamed off after the pirates. So about 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, he came back and he said, Bambola, I'm circling these three boats. They're crammed with we're crammed with people. What is your intention? I said, well, my intention is to wait until you get our gear back. Can you board them? Can you attack them? And he went, well, just wait one. I'm talking to my boss in the Pentagon. So I was quite impressed by that, really. They were chatting to the Pentagon from the middle of the Red Sea. Well, I don't know why I'm impressed by it. Of course they could. But he came back and he said, yeah, the Pentagon says they're sending more suitable facilities for the situation. So we're going to stand by until that facility arrives, and you can proceed on towards your destination. And I went, oh, so what about the gear? He said, well, it's up to you, but I don't think we're going to be able to attack these people at the moment. It may take some considerable time to sort this situation out. So I said, oh, okay, right you are. He said, what are your intentions? So I said, well, wait one, and I'll have a look. At that moment, a couple of jets appeared on the horizon and whizzed in to where the American warship was, towards the horizon, about 2 or 3 miles away, and they dived down low over there and circled and whatever. So I wondered if that was the only more appropriate facility the Pentagon was sending, or whether, you know, something else was going to happen. Hey, who knows? I went down below and I picked up my chart to look at it to see what I should do next, and underneath the chart was my laptop. They'd never found the laptop because I'd closed the lid and put the chart over the top of the laptop. The pirates had never found it, so I was set. I had a chart plotter, and I had with the laptop, with a dongle, and I had the GPS in the cockpit. So, you know, as far as navigating was going, as far as getting to the next place was going, there really wasn't a problem. From our position in virtually the middle of the, well, 30 or 40 miles off the Yemen coast, the nearest possible port was Aden, which I really didn't fancy. It didn't seem like a bright idea. And then about 700 miles further on was Djibouti, which I knew was a French territory port. I knew it was a friendly port. I knew it was a place where we would have facilities like the internet, and it would be pretty safe. It seemed to me Djibouti was the place to go. I needed to replace the gear. I needed new binoculars. I needed another single sideband. I just needed to get, and we needed to stop. We needed to stop and relax and sort ourselves out. So I decided on Djibouti, got onto the warship and said, American warship, this is Bambola, we're going to head for Djibouti. We're going to make passage for Djibouti. We'll be there in 2 or 3 days. And he went, roger that, we'll take care of this end, have a good passage. And I went, thank you very much for your help, thank you for turning up, I'm most grateful, bon route, bon voyage. Clocked off, went up on deck, we shouted to Rolf, we're heading for Djibouti, and he went, fine Michael, I'll follow you. So off we went. Alex pulled the main up, I let it out, and we stuck a reef in because it was blowing about 30 knots at that stage, and we started trucking towards Djibouti. That day was fine. That night, Ulf was able to keep reasonably close company. The next morning, dawn came up, and there on the horizon, sort of where Djibouti would be ahead, was a warship just sitting there, and it just sort of sitting there as we trucked towards it. I had the feeling it was a French warship. It was very square. It was very, and the French have a lot of. The French were very busy designing warships and building warships which couldn't be seen by radar. They were like stealth bombers. So they were building stealth warships, and that it looked odd. It looked like a stealth warship, so I'm pretty sure it was French. I called once a French warship on Channel 16, but there was a big nothing. I mean, military folks tend not to chat away on radios too often. We trucked on that day, and around the warship vanished, and around noon or late afternoon, a helicopter, a Chinook helicopter, flew over us, flew past us, went on for, I don't know, went on to the horizon, went just up to the horizon, then came back and flew back over us. So I got the feeling that he was sort of checking up that we were okay. And it looked like we would get towards, we'd be closing Djibouti in the dark. So I got my logbook out, I got my pilot book out, my North African pilot out, and opened it up and read about the approaches to Djibouti. And they're written for yachts, these books. And the first thing it said that I saw was you shouldn't approach Djibouti in the dark because of the reefs. It's very, very difficult to see them, and you should only do it in daylight when the sun is high to feel your way in between the reefs in order to get into Djibouti harbour. And I thought, oh shit, I really don't fancy just sitting out here now quite close to the Somalian coastline in the dark. I think I'll risk it. I'll use CMAP 93 on my laptop, and we'll trust those charts not too bad, and we'll get into Djibouti on those charts. So that's what we did. We with in the darkness, with Ulf in Josephine motoring astern, I followed the route on CMAP, and we got ourselves through the reefs, and then hung a left up into what was Djibouti Harbour. It was pitch dark. I couldn't even see much in the way of light, shore lights or anything, but according to the GPS, according to CMAP, we were in the harbour area, and I got it down to about, I don't know, 7 meters, 6 meters, 7 meters or so on, in the sort of anchorage area. And I sent Alex forward to start dropping the anchor, and I heard him with his foot on the button and the anchor chain running out. And then out of the darkness came a really big, darkened rib inflatable, crowded with a load of people, some of them in Arab gear. And honestly, my little heart sank. I just went, shit, I really, I'm bugged if I can do all this again. And I stood in the cockpit, and I put my hands up again, and a voice came, "Hey, it's okay. We are NATO troops. We're NATO troops from a German warship. We've come to welcome you to Djibouti. We heard what happened to you, and we've come to say welcome to Djibouti, and we have a small present for you. Can we come alongside?" And I went, yeah, sure, yeah, by all means, please come alongside. So Alex finished dropping the chain. I went astern and dug in a little bit, and the rib came up alongside, and there were all these guys in camouflage uniform with, to be fair, with sidearms. But more important than the sidearms, they handed me up 2 trays of beer. 2 trays of cans of beer, and they said, "We bring you a present for you to celebrate your arrival in Djibouti. Tomorrow, please come to our ship. You'll be made very welcome. We'd like to welcome you, buy you a drink in the wardroom, and you can relax now. You're safe." And I went, "Oh, great!" And it was marvellous. Yeah, we sat in the cockpit, Alex and Monique and I, and we cracked open a few cans, and we truly relaxed. The Germans were absolutely marvelous with us. They welcomed, obviously, Ulf because he was German, and Alex because he was German very much, but also Monique and I, and they were charming. They entertained us in the wardroom. Later on, they took me to their favorite cafe, internet cafe, where they all used to go ashore to drink off the ship, which had a good internet connection, and so I could get on to the internet, and I could order new equipment for Bambola. I tried first to get it from British chandlers, but I mean they were just hopeless. There was no, the concept of sending stuff to Djibouti was beyond them. So I got onto West Marine in the States, and West Marine took my order for new single sideband binoculars, VH, all the stuff, and dispatched it by DHL to arrive within 24 hours. Absolutely, absolutely brilliant. That morning on board Bambola, the FBI arrived in a rib, driven by the German warship, and they came on board and they explained the problem that the Americans were having. They wanted to know, they wanted to know about the attack and so on, because they made notes and all the rest of it. And they said, "Could you identify them?" I went, "Yeah, well, maybe." So the problem apparently was that, yes, American intelligence knew all about the three Mr. Bigs that ran all the Somalian pirates. There were three separate ones that ran Somalian pirates who attacked ships, vessels, and indeed small boats, robbed them, and took the stuff back. And the way it worked was that these Mr. Bigs employed smaller Mr. Bigs who went down to fishing villages all along the Somalian coast and mainly employed or mainly recruited young Somalian fishermen or young Somalian men in the village, and they would equip them with AKs, Glocks, weapons, whatever, and send them out in their boats in order to be pirates and attack ships. And they would attack ships or whatever, bring the stuff back in, give it to the junior Mr. Biggs, who would pass it on up to the big Mr. Biggs, who would sell the stuff or ransom the ships or ransom the crew or whatever. So American intelligence, and presumably German intelligence and French intelligence, knew all about that. But what under international law they couldn't do was go out and attack vessels on the high seas. If a vessel attacked them, yes, they could attack it, but they couldn't run around being illegal policemen doing it. So that was the story. And yeah, I have heard that again since, that there is a problem with international law, that you can't just decide. You can do it in your own national waters, of course, but you can't do it in international waters. So yeah, that was it. So DHL guy arrived with all our gear in boxes, and Alex and I undid the boxes, and because the pirates are being so careful, they hadn't just ripped it all out, they'd actually undone the connections in the back. It only took us a few hours to get get a new radar back on board, reinstall the single sideband, the VHF radio, another GPS, all binoculars, all that. So we were able to refit that in 2 or 3 hours. It was a really, really simple job. So I got back on the single sideband radio and tuned in to the Red Sea net, which we had established in Oman. And I told the guys on the Red Sea net that I'd been attacked. In fact, they'd heard it through American sources, but I was able to tell them in more detail and describe the pirate boats. And even as I was talking on the Red Sea net, 3 or 4 boats that were motoring up actually through Aden, through the Gulf of Aden, had 3 pirate boats, and they said, Michael, were they like old ship's lifeboats? Did they have blue on the side? I went, yeah, it's them. Get out of it. And they opened up their throttles and whizzed away in the opposite direction from the pirates, who gave chase, screaming on their. They switched to channel 16 and they shouted on 16, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. They got in their single sidebands and called 2182. I got in touch with the German warship and said, my friends are out there being attacked, and the 3 boats with the pirates chasing them within 10 minutes had a couple of fighter jets over them buzzing the pirate boats, and they buzzed the pirate boats. I don't think they actually opened fire, but they came down out of the sky really down low and made their attentions, and the 3 pirate boats whizzed away. And I gathered later that on the net that a warship turned up, a Spanish warship turned up and escorted the 3 boats to the mouth of the Red Sea and away from Somalia. So yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, what more is there to say? We fueled up. We said thank you again to the Germans for looking after us so well, and we headed out to make the passage towards the Mediterranean, up the Red Sea, inside the coral reefs, where there was another somewhat sad adventure, where a sad incident happened, and if I get permission from the people involved, I'll tell you about that in my next video. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please press my subscribe button wherever it is, down there in the corner, and if you don't, it doesn't matter. What the hell, it's all good fun, isn't it? Fair winds, safe landfalls. Bye.